Now it's time for Inspirational Women and my guest, Christy Crispin. Some years ago, I heard this statement about fulfillment and success. Find a need and fill it. And as I learned a little of Christy, I feel she truly embodies this and gives us a great model. In her life, Christy is a mom. She has chosen to be a foster mom, an adopted mom, and her life's path has led her to create a fostered life. Let's meet her to hear this life-changing story. Christy Crispin, good morning. It is so wonderful to connect with you this morning.
Thanks, Kate. It's great to be talking with you today.
You are doing such phenomenal work. I'm just overwhelmed, really, with all that you're doing and how you're going about it, and really what kinds of transformations can occur along the way in this whole critically important area of foster care, foster families. So first of all, thank you for being so passionate about this work.
Oh, I can't help it. If I could, I probably would try to step back, but I can't seem to. So thanks.
So a little bit of background foundation. It's not that you've been doing foster care, being involved as a foster parent for really all that long. It's been, about 6 years?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, we were licensed. In fact, December 31st is our 6th anniversary of being licensed, and then we got our first children about 2 weeks after that. So we're coming up on our 6th anniversary of that. Actually, is it coming up on our 7th? Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm thinking now. I think it was, anyway, it doesn't matter, 6 or 7. But my passion for foster care really goes back longer than that. It's been at least 14 years since foster care first came onto my radar, and I kind of got this fire in my bones that never went away. And then when my husband and I met and started dating, started getting serious, we talked about it at that time and agreed that this was something we both wanted to do and kind of how we envisioned forming a family. We were not going at it with the intention of adopting, but we've always been open to that. So we've said, our goal is to be a home, a safe place for kids who are in crisis or transition. And then if adoption comes out of that, we're open to that as well. But it's not like we went into it hoping to adopt, if you know what I mean. So
yes. We
have done both. We've had a number of children who've come and gone, and we've adopted 3, and we're very close to adopting our 4th. And so it's quite an adventure, and the best thing that we've learned to do is just to really stay open and flexible. So
adventure. It sure sounds like it is. And it occurs to me that how perfect that you met your husband, that he had essentially the same kind of dream, the same passion. Of course, if he didn't, you may not have ended up together. But it's...
Oh, yeah.
You are a strong unit this way.
We are, and it's so interesting you say that because my husband and I were 35 and 40 when we met. Neither of us had been married before. We had both had a couple of false starts, but never landed. And I think, looking at it now, and maybe people listening who aren't married yet and who are kind of, looking at that, our shared mission and vision for what our life would look like is what is the foundation of our marriage. And it's just so interesting because I wouldn't have necessarily understood that until we were in it. But he didn't have necessarily a passion for foster care itself, but he has a very strong passion for justice and for people who are in crisis. And he has 2 people in his family who have served as foster parents over the years. And so he had seen it sort of in passing and seen from a distance in a way. And then when I mentioned it, it just sort of fit so beautifully in with who he was as a person, that his words were, "I love it." Like when we were like, "Hey, do you want kids? We should talk about that. Here's how I envision it." And he was like, "I love it." And we've been united on that. And I would say for anyone listening who is considering becoming a foster parent, it is vital that you and your partner are 100% on board together. If you're not, it will only make it very hard in your marriage or your relationship, and also in your stability as a foster family, because this only works because both of us are fully committed. And I can't emphasize that enough.
Oh, it is so beautiful. It's making me tear because, because it's so vitally important to our world. Just the nature of way things exist. And it's not new today. It's existed for, I think, a century or probably centuries. So to really have you articulated in this way, and further than that, to be living this, and even further than that, to be sharing it and wanting to make more of a almost like a guidebook, a pattern for others to be able to understand some of the pitfalls. It's not like, okay, this is exactly how you do it, but you bring us an understanding.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that there are sweeping generalizations that exist for a reason, in that there are a lot of commonalities between children in care. But it's also important to really understand that each child is unique and and one of the best things that a foster parent can do is to really take time to see that child and learn who they are and learn as much about what you can about what they've been through. Sometimes you know a lot. Sometimes you know very little, and you only see the effects of what's happened to them, but you don't actually know the details of it. And so to kind of be able to see kids, to pay attention to who they are, and to give them a space where they can really discover who they are, and grow into who they are. At the same time, supporting whatever efforts are being made to help them be restored to the family that they come from, which is really complicated. And, it is like many, many things in life, anyone looking at it from a distance or hearing about it can say things like, we can either feel really strongly about how important it is that kids be restored to the family they come from, which I do think is important when it's a good idea and when it's safe and when it's, going to be good and healthy for the child. But a lot of times it isn't possible for various reasons. And, and so there are just a lot of really complicated parts of the story. And meanwhile, children are in really unstable situations for the duration of their time in foster care. And that can go on, unfortunately, for years, even though there are laws in place that are supposed to make their time in foster care much shorter. There are still all sorts of reasons why children just stay in foster care for many years, and a lot of times for their whole childhood. And then we send them out into the world, and they have had 18 years or 16 years or 12 years or, 10 years or even 5 years of these really important formative years of life that have formed in them expectations about the world, expectations about people, expectations about the very people who should be caring for them. And that could be their parents, it could be extended family members, or it could be the foster parents whose lives they were, entrusted to. And, if they've had a bad experience in foster care, it only perpetuates whatever they were already formed by, before coming into care. So it's just so complicated. And my thing is, there are many areas in the foster care world that really need overhaul and need a lot of attention. And if you think about it as a big picture, it can get quite overwhelming. And I do read a lot and I do pay attention. My goal is to come alongside foster parents and help foster parents do their part better, because there's a lot we can do. We're not the only solution, and we're not the only answer. We're not the only problem. I mean, when things are going badly, but I feel like there's more we can do to help foster parents be equipped, be supported, be informed and encouraged along the way, so that, for example, we don't have a child move in, a new foster parent really excited, wants to make a difference. The child moves in, and within a couple weeks, the foster parent is completely overwhelmed by the challenges that, have suddenly also moved into their home. And to really help equip foster parents to make sure they know what resources and support they can find so that they can keep that child in their home and not be yet another stop along that child's journey. I mean, I've read about kids who were in 50, 80 foster homes from the time they were, 5 until they were 18. What that does to a child is we can't even begin to understand how damaging just moving that much is to a child, and let alone whatever else they might have gone through and any substances they might have been exposed to in utero that gave their brains a disadvantage from the start. I mean, there's just so many layers, but my passion is to help foster parents be more equipped and sustained so that they can not just stay the course with the child who's been entrusted to them, but they can do it in a way where they are also flourishing as a family. And it's a passion of mine. I hear so many foster parents who are like just surviving the day. And I was that foster parent for a couple of years. I mean, I was just surviving the day. And so much about my personality was affected by it. The level of stress that we lived in was certainly, it affected our marriage dynamic and just all sorts of things. And we pushed through, we fought through, and there was something in me that was like, we want to stay the course in foster care and support, we feel called to this, but it cannot work if it's not a place where we as a family can also thrive and flourish. And how can we do that while we're living with all of these huge issues? And so that's my passion, and that's what I've been kind of devoting a lot of my time to for the last 5 years or so.
And the way then you're really sharing this passion in a very simple way for us these days is through your website. At least that's one major way, I feel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it started, so this is how it started. I was about 6 months into my first placement and realizing how little I was prepared for. And going through a lot. We went through a lot with our first kids, and I'm the kind of person, I'm a go-getter, I'm an initiator, I'm a problem solver. So as these problems were coming up or these situations were coming up, I was on the phone, I was writing emails, I was Googling, I was trying to get as much information as I could. And as I was learning things, meeting with therapists and beginning the process of doing, child therapy with one of our children, and learning so much about trauma and just learning about the effects of trauma on the brain. None of that was something I went into this knowing. And so as I began to learn, I started looking for resources. I was like, how can we let foster parents know these things so that they don't suddenly find themselves with children in their home affected by these truths about trauma and all of this? And so I was like, surely there must be some easy access online to some sort of resource. There's so much on YouTube. So I started looking on YouTube, and I did not find anything that I felt really accurately showed what it's really like for foster parents. I found foster parent or foster care videos on YouTube that were basically like really romanticized kind of, Hallmark Hall of Fame type like YouTube videos that painted foster care as this happily ever after for children who are, removed from the horrors and then placed in foster care, and somehow their lives got all better, which is not true at all. Even in a good foster home, it isn't true. And I knew it wasn't true. So I was like, okay, well, that's not helpful. And then the other side of it was, kids who have been in foster care who had horrible experiences and then were taking to YouTube to get their voices heard, which I applaud them for. I think it's really important. And I learn a lot from watching YouTube videos of children who were in foster care. But I was like, none of this is the sweet spot of what I'm looking for, which is a relatable foster parent telling it like it really is, but in a way that stays positive and keeps people wanting to be foster parents. Because if we only talk about how hard it is and, all the challenges, why would anybody volunteer for that, right? So it's important to me to do it in a way that's very honest, but also very hopeful and positive. And so that's what I've endeavored to do. So I started a YouTube channel. And as that grew, I started hearing from people all over the world who were writing to me for advice or my thoughts on things. And what I would do is I would take these emails and then I would call people I knew. I would call other foster parents. I would call social workers that I had befriended. I would research it online. I would look for books, and I would just get back to them the research and the stuff that I had found. And that got to be more than I could keep up with. I am not able to keep up with all of the messages that I receive now. But what I do now is then I will get messages from people and I'll write blog posts answering their questions, because my assumption is they're not the only ones wondering that. So it grew into a blog, and then my husband actually suggested earlier this year that I start a podcast. Actually, he probably suggested it a long time ago, but it took me until this year to finally do it. And I had hosted a podcast several years ago now, dealing with something completely different. But I love interviewing people and talking with people and hearing people's stories. And I believe that listening in on a conversation like what you and I are having right now is a great way for people to learn about something. And so I started this podcast. And what's beautiful about the podcast is that it's not my experience. It's other people's experience that I'm sharing. And so I've had a lot of people on it who are former foster youth, who are now doing things like being foster parents or social workers. And then I've had other foster parents on, and child therapists, trauma therapists, foster care advocates. And so that's become the third kind of the third part of what I'm doing. I've got the blog, the YouTube channel, and the podcast. And then this year I also started a small private group, membership-only group for foster parents and prospective foster parents. That's a lot more intimate. It's a weekly live call where we're all on a Google Meet together. We can see each other. We can hear each other. And it's kind of part support group and part training. I bring on people, professionals, experienced foster parents, again, therapists and different authors, things like that. I bring them on and I essentially facilitate a conversation with them. And then the people in the group have a chance to ask questions, to share from their experiences. So it's kind of a support group and a training time online, really accessible. And that's the goal. And what I've done is I've created what I needed. And so I love it. And it's going beautifully, and hopefully it will be something that I can sustain. I'm enjoying it a lot, so I think it's going to be something I'll be doing for a while.
It feels like it's the most perfect thing because it's fulfilling what you needed, but you're finding others in the same kind of situation that, of course, find that it fulfills what they need at a given time. It's that kind of grassroots approach that makes such great sense.
Yes, it does. And I'll tell you, foster parent, one of the things that I've heard so much is from foster parents who are writing to say, I thought I was the only one who found it this hard. I'm getting choked up just thinking about that, because I hear from so many people who are like, by you coming on YouTube or, wherever and being honest about how hard it is and about these different things that you face, I realized I'm not alone. And isn't that what we all need in whatever we're struggling with? Knowing that we're not alone it makes all the difference in the world. And too often foster parents don't feel like they can be completely honest because maybe they're afraid they'll lose their license, or they're afraid that the kids will be removed because they're being honest about how hard it is. And they're not saying they want the kids removed. They want help. They want support so they can actually help these kids and make it work. And so I think just offering this awareness that you are not alone in this, and when things do get really, really hard, there is a space where you can safely bounce around ideas. We have walked through foster parents who did have to come to the really hard decision that they were not equipped to care for a child who was in their home. And we're talking a child with very serious emotional issues where they needed round-the-clock supervision. They were suicidal. They were doing harm to themselves and to others. So there are those cases when a child's needs do exceed what can be provided in a typical home environment, and they need a lot more supervision. But I will just say that is the rare exception. It's not the norm in my experience for kids in foster care. Most kids in foster care would thrive and do thrive in a stable home environment where there is some structure, there is a level of predictability, and sure, you'll have times when it will be really hard. We have dealt with a lot of big tantrums from older children, so you might have a 6 or 8 year old tantruming like a 2-year-old, but when a 6 or 8-year-old is doing it, the damage can be a little farther reaching. You might have a child who runs away, but those things can be dealt with and they can pass. So if you can kind of weather it for a season with a child, you will begin to see them settle in and thrive. And that's another part of my message is one of the best pieces of advice that I got during our first placement when things were really, really hard. I called a friend of mine who is a CPS worker in another state, and I was just telling her what all was going on. And I was like, I don't know how we're going to keep doing this. We want to, but something has to change. And she said to me, just stay with him. If you can continue to show up for him each day for 4 months, you will see a change. And it was 6 months, but she was absolutely right. And I tell people that now, one of the most powerful things we can do is just stay with our kids, assuming that they are not doing self-harm, that they're not, setting fires or doing harm to others. If you can just stay with them through the tantrums, through the huge feelings, through the, harsh words and just the abuse that they might levy because they are so hurt, you will begin to see a change. And I've seen that over and over and over again, to just encourage foster parents to stick it out a little bit longer and see what happens.
I think that we just cannot imagine, unless perhaps we've been in that place ourselves, a child who's been in a home that they've had to be taken from, the kind of abuse or neglect that's gone on, so that there is a definite source for that pain and that rebellion that's going on. So to be able to just stay with them, I could see that that's just the greatest gift that you could give them.
Yes. I have really, and this is not something I came up with, so I can't take credit for this. I took a Positive Parenting Solutions course that I retake it a couple times each year. I go through all the materials. It's an online course. But the thing I took away from that really has stuck with me through all of this, and I think it is such a simple understanding. Kids need to feel a sense of empowerment. They need to feel a sense of connectedness. They need to feel that they belong somewhere and that they have a place somewhere and that they have some personal control in their lives. And this is 2-year-olds need that. This is probably about part of the source of tantrums for every 2-year-old is that they want some control. They don't necessarily have the language to articulate what they want. And so they have these tantrums because they're just so frustrated. But if you take that to a child who has had pretty much every single modicum of empowerment taken away from them and control taken away from them, and then they're removed from the place that they had a sense of belonging, even if it was dysfunctional and unhealthy, and you place them in a home where they have no history, no familiarity, and no sense of belonging, you've basically taken away 2 of their fundamental felt needs. And, assuming that you're feeding a child, giving them a safe place to sleep and that sort of thing, these are the things they need more than anything. So if people can look at them through the lens of how can I give this child a feeling of empowerment and how can I help them to feel connected, that makes all the difference in the world. And a lot of what I do is kind of comes back to that and how to help foster parents achieve that in an environment where, we don't know how long the child will be here. The child doesn't know that either. And that's one of the hardest things for kids is not knowing how long they're going to be where they are. And it's not always because the foster parent initiates a move. It's all sorts of factors that initiate moves for kids in foster care. So those 2 things are hugely important. And if you can begin to fuel those felt needs for a child, you will begin to see them heal, at least start to heal and rise up. And there are a lot of other factors too. If you have a child who is exposed in utero to drugs and alcohol, especially alcohol, the potential for brain damage is there. And so then you're dealing with a child who actually is, who has brain dysfunction. And then that's, an added challenge that you have to get training and equipping for if you're going to be able to stay the course. So Yeah, there's a lot of levels and factors, and I try to address as much of it as I can. And a lot of what I do in my resources is a response to what people are writing in and asking me about.
And we should mention that wealth of information is on your website, and that is
fosteredlife.com. AFOSTEREDLIFE.com.
And we owe it to ourselves, even if we are not necessarily thinking about fostering ourselves, it's information that is just so invaluable for life and awareness. And one of the things that you had noted to me earlier in a note, Christy, was about a fact that you had read about incarceration related to foster care. Would you share that?
Sure, and it's so funny because since I wrote you that note, I've seen additional research, and it's even worse than I thought. So there are a number of different, research is always complicated because there's a lot of factors in research, but generally speaking, it appears that 1 in 4 incarcerated individuals in our nation spent time in foster care. Another bit of research I saw earlier this morning, I was doing some more reading, and that actually put the estimate closer to 80%. But at any rate, there is a very high level of correlation between foster care involvement and prison. And the Kansas City Star actually has just released in the last week a wonderful body of reporting, 6 long articles. NPR also covered their reporting because it's just so robust and so rich and extensive. And it really goes into detail why this happens, but there is such a correlation. And I guess the point I was making to you, and that I would love your listeners to really, take in, is that being called to be a foster parent is just it's one part of the puzzle, but every single person should care and make it their mission to somehow be more aware and also involved in some way in supporting these kids who are in these situations. And, when I became a foster parent and it began to be something that I talked about more, it would just come up casually in conversation. And everywhere I go, I connect with people who were either in foster care or I went to my doctor, and I had no idea that my doctor was in a home where her parents were foster parents. And so she had grown up with foster siblings. And, it's everywhere. Kids at your child's school, they're not going to wear a T-shirt that says I'm in foster care. But believe me when I tell you, there are children at your child's school who are currently in foster care. And there are ways that you could be supportive. Just inviting that child over to your house for a play date could be huge. I mean, I can't even begin to express to you, because children in foster care lose connection with their friends every time they move. It's a little easier for older kids who have phones and have computers to stay connected with their friends once they move. But for little ones, elementary school age kids, they get plucked out of a school, they get plucked out of their family, they get moved to another family, moved to a new school. So if you can somehow surreptitiously find out who at your kid's school might be in care and just reach out to their family, reach out to their foster parents, that would make a huge difference. So there's a lot that people can do, and I'd love for people to be thinking about that more instead of just kind of leaving it up to the foster parents and the social workers to handle it,
Exactly. And that, I'm so glad you said it in that way, Christy, because yes, we're not all in a position or made out to be foster parents. However, we can just really be part of that whole web of making this just such a better situation for children and really making that difference, bringing justice, as your husband said, bringing justice to the world.
Yes. No one wants foster care for kids, and I've gone on record saying I hate foster care. I mean, in the sense of I hate that there's a need for it. I hate that it has to exist, but it does have to exist because there are parents, unfortunately, in the world who are harming their children. And there's a whole other, conversation happening right now about, should children even be removed? Are we removing children too quickly? Are we removing children because their parents are poor and punishing them for being poor? And I can just tell you from my experience with the children who have been in my care and for the kids who I've gotten to know over the years through the circles I've been involved with, they aren't being pulled because their parents are poor. They're being pulled because their parents are doing harm or standing back and letting harm be done. And, so as long as that kind of thing is happening, there is a need for someone to step in. If a parent isn't doing the job of protecting their own children, someone needs to do it. And so, unfortunately, foster care is not always the safest place for a child. And my goal is to try to do a little bit to change that.
And I greatly appreciate, and I trust our listeners hear your passion and appreciate this as well. There's so much more that we could talk about, but, time is our enemy at this point. But I hope that we can plan to have another conversation because there is so much to discuss.
I am always ready and willing to be back with you. So I appreciate so much your openness and just your hospitality, inviting me to be on your show today.
Well, Christy, it's just definitely been so informative and just so compelling. So thank you greatly for this work that you've been called to do.
My pleasure, Kate, and thank you.
And with that, we're at the end of a very full hour of Inspirational Women with Christy Crispin and Sunday Morning Magazine with Dr. Stephen G. Post. I'm Kate Daniels, your host, and I greatly appreciate your sharing this hour with me and these special guests, particularly at this holiday time of the year. For details that you might have missed, information you'd like to know, please just send me an email, kated@warm1069.com, and I'll get right back to you. Also, if you'd like to listen again or share these important stories with your family and friends, find the podcast on our Warm 1069 webpage. Just click on the podcast tab and look for the show and guest names. I now wish you and your family a day of finding your connection to each other, to life, and to your purpose. Have an extraordinary week of the same, and then please plan to join me again next weekend for another hour of Sunday Morning Magazine and Inspirational Women on Warm 1069. Good morning.